The office had a buzz to it that day. The hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the shuffle of feet in polished shoes. It was the kind of event that came every year to celebrate milestones and hard work. It should have felt like a triumph. 20 years. 20 years of loyalty and dedication to a company that had given me a steady paycheck and a predictable life. Yet, as I walked through the lobby, greeting colleagues and offering a half-hearted smile, I felt like an outsider at my own celebration. I glanced around the room, noting the usual faces, the laughter, the clinking of wine glasses. I had become so used to the routine of these events. The speeches, the awards, the handshakes, they all blurred together over time. But tonight something felt different. It was just after Mark had tapped me on the shoulder that everything shifted. He looked at me with a hesitant expression, his eyes betraying an unease I had never seen before. Mark was more than a colleague. He was a friend, a man I had known for years, a man whose word I had trusted. But when he pulled me aside, whispering in my ear that he had something important to show me, a knot began to form in my stomach. I followed him quietly through the crowd, away from the noise of the main event. We stopped in a quieter corner of the building, near the windows that overlooked the city. Mark's hand shook slightly as he pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. He handed it to me and I looked at the video that played. It took me a moment to process what I was seeing. It was Megan, the woman I had shared my life with for nearly 30 years. She was laughing, dancing intimately with another man. His hand was on her waist, their faces close, her body moving with his in a way that was both too familiar and too foreign. The same dress, the same jewelry, the jewelry I had given her. My chest tightened and I had to swallow hard to stop the bile that rose in my throat. I didn't know what to say. I looked at Mark, who seemed torn between guilt and pity. He didn't need to say anything. The video spoke volumes. Is this real? My voice came out like a whisper, thick with disbelief. Mark nodded, looking away. I didn't want to be the one to show you, but you needed to know. It was at that party last weekend. I didn't know how I felt in that moment. Betrayal, shock, anger, and something else I couldn't name all swirled inside me. Megan. The woman I thought I knew. The woman I had built my life with. And now this thing I couldn't even begin to understand. A raw, exposed wound torn open in front of me. I couldn't stay in that corner anymore. I turned and left, my mind whirling as I pushed through the crowd. It felt like the walls were closing in. The laughter around me felt deafening, the music too loud. I had to leave. I couldn't breathe in that space anymore. Not with that image playing in my mind. Not with the shame pressing down on my chest. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I had to get out of there. I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to speak to anyone. I needed to face Megan. It wasn't a long drive home, but it felt like hours. The streets blurred in front of me, the city lights streaking by like an abstract painting. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles a stark white against the dashboard. My mind replayed the video over and over again, the image of Megan dancing with another man like a cruel loop I couldn't escape. When I finally pulled into the driveway, everything felt different. The house I had shared with Megan for so long now felt foreign. It felt cold, empty, like a house that had been abandoned. I walked through the front door and she was there, sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her as if nothing was wrong. She looked up when I entered, her face lighting up with a smile. But the moment her eyes met mine, she froze. I don't know how long we stood there staring at each other. She knew something was wrong. I could see it in her eyes. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and showed her the video. Her face paled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I could see the panic in her eyes, the guilt flooding her face. Megan ***. I said, my voice low and steady. What is this? What's going on? She swallowed hard, her eyes welling with tears. I didn't want you to find out like this. I felt like the floor had dropped out beneath me. Her words were a blur as she began to explain, stammering out a confession. She had been having an affair. With Aaron Mitchell, a colleague from her educational project. My mind couldn't fully comprehend what she was saying. It felt like I was listening to someone else's life, someone else's pain. Not mine. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice cracking. I never meant for this to happen. It just happened. I felt numb. The weight of her words crushed me. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had built my life with, had betrayed me. And not just with anyone, but with someone she worked with every day. Someone who knew us, knew our life. The thought was suffocating. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned away from her, walking to the door, struggling to breathe. I needed air. I needed space. I needed time to think. John ***. she called, but I didn't turn back. Please don't leave me. We can fix this. We can. I slammed the door behind me and the sound echoed through the house. The house that now felt like a prison. I drove aimlessly, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly I could feel my fingers cramping. The streets passed in a blur, my mind a whirlwind of disbelief and hurt. I wasn't sure where I was going or what I was hoping to find. Maybe it was just the need to escape the suffocating silence of my home, the house that had once been a symbol of comfort but now felt like a cage. I pulled into a quiet park, the kind I used to visit on weekends to clear my head. The trees were bare, the air crisp, and the distant sounds of children playing filled the stillness. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like an alien world, distant and unreachable. Nothing made sense anymore. I parked the car and sat in the driver's seat, staring out at the empty swings swaying gently in the breeze. It wasn't just the affair. It was everything. The years we had spent together, the life we had built. It was like watching the pieces of my past crumble to dust before my eyes. And I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop the hurt, the betrayal, or the overwhelming sense of loss. I thought of Megan. How had we ended up here? We had been so happy once, or at least I thought we were. I remembered the early years of our marriage, how we had laughed together, built a life together. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Had it all been a lie? Had I been blind to the cracks in our relationship, too comfortable to see the signs? I felt a pang of guilt. Maybe I should have noticed. Maybe I should have asked the right questions. Maybe I should have paid more attention to the little things, the way Megan had seemed distant lately. But how could I have known? She had always been so good at hiding her emotions, at putting on a facade that everything was fine. And now, all of it, the trust, the love, the shared history, had come crashing down. The phone in my pocket buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. I stared at the screen, seeing Megan's name. I should have turned it off, ignored her like I wanted to. But I didn't. I answered. John ***. Her voice came through the speaker, shaky and small. I don't know what to say. I never meant for this to happen. Please just talk to me. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to listen to her excuses, her apologies. I wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again. How could I? I don't know what you want me to say, Megan, I replied, my voice low and cold. You've already said it all. I saw the video. I know what you did. What else is there? There was silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought she might hang up. Instead, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry, John. I made a mistake. A huge mistake. Please, I don't want to lose you. The words hit me like a slap in the face. Megan had always been the one to keep things together, to be the calm in the storm. But now she sounded like a stranger, broken, desperate. And I hated that I couldn't find it in myself to comfort her. Not now. Not after everything. You don't get to say that, I said, my grip on the steering wheel tightening. You don't get to fix this with an apology. You've hurt me in a way that I don't even know how to fix. And I don't know if I even want to. I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to show weakness. But the emotions were too overwhelming to contain. Maybe it's better if we're apart, I continued, my voice trembling slightly. Maybe that's the only way either of us will find peace. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, heavy and uneven. I understand, she finally said. But please know, John, that I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted this. I ended the call before she could say anything else. I couldn't listen anymore. It was too much. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and put the car in gear, driving aimlessly once more, hoping the road would take me somewhere far away from the pain. When I returned home hours later, the house was still the same, quiet, empty. Megan had left. Her things were gone, or at least most of them. Her absence hung in the air like a thick fog. The house felt like a shell, like a building that had once been full of life but now lacked the spark it had once had. I wandered through the rooms, touching objects that had once been so familiar. Her books on the shelf, the framed photos of us on vacation. It all seemed meaningless now, a collection of memories that no longer mattered. I found the contract, the postnuptial agreement we had signed years ago. I had never thought I would need it. It had always been one of those things we did just in case. But now, it was the only thing that offered any kind of stability. It was a cold comfort, but it was all I had. I sat down at the kitchen table, my mind a jumble of thoughts. Megan had broken something between us, something that couldn't be fixed with apologies or promises. And as much as it hurt, I knew that I couldn't go back. Not after what she had done. I didn't know what the future held. But I knew one thing, I couldn't stay in that house. I couldn't stay in that life. The pieces of my past were shattered, but I had to start somewhere. I had to rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, that meant letting go. It wasn't easy leaving the house. It had been home for so long. The walls that had witnessed the early days of my marriage, the laughter of our children growing up, the quiet evenings with Megan, they now felt suffocating. But I couldn't stay there. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it was falling apart. I decided to leave it all behind. I sold the house, packed up only the essentials, and moved out to a small piece of land in the countryside. It wasn't much, just a modest property, a few acres with a small farmhouse and a barn. The land was overgrown, the house needed work, but I didn't care. It was a fresh start. A place where I could get away from the memories, the pain, the life I once knew. The first few weeks were difficult. I spent most of my time clearing the land, chopping wood, and fixing up the house. I didn't have a plan, I just needed to keep moving. There was a certain satisfaction in the work, a feeling of accomplishment that had been missing from my life for so long. It was physical, straightforward, and required all my attention. There was no room for overthinking, no room for feeling sorry for myself. I found myself waking up early every morning, the quiet of the country filling the air. The sun would rise over the hills and I would sit on the porch, drinking my coffee and just taking in the silence. I hadn't realized how much I missed peace until I found it again. The world outside seemed so loud, so full of expectations. But here, it was just me, the land, and the work that needed to be done. It wasn't until a month later that I began to realize how much I had changed. I had never been much of a farmer, but something about working with the earth felt right. It was like I was rediscovering parts of myself I had forgotten. I spent hours in the garden, planting vegetables and herbs, watching them grow and finding peace in the rhythm of it all. And then there was Grace. She was the last person I expected to meet out here, but then again, I wasn't looking for anyone. I was lost in my own world, trying to piece together a life that had been shattered. But Grace was different. She was a widow, someone who had known loss in a way that was familiar to me. She made homemade jams and sold them at the local farmer's market. I had met her by chance when I stopped by the market one Saturday to buy some fruit. Her booth was small but warm, the scent of fruit preserves filling the air. She smiled as I approached and we struck up a conversation. I wasn't in the mood for small talk, but she had a way of making you feel comfortable, like you'd known her forever. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people talking about simple things: gardening, the weather, life in the country. Over the next few weeks, I found myself stopping by her booth more often. I had never been much of a socializer, but something about her company made the silence of my farm feel less lonely. We talked about everything and nothing at all. She shared stories about her late husband, David, an artist who had passed away several years ago. He had been the love of her life, and though she had moved on in many ways, there was always a part of her that still missed him. I could relate to that. I didn't miss Megan the same way I missed the person I used to be, the man I had been before all of this, before the betrayal, before the heartbreak. Grace and I weren't rushing into anything. We were just two people who had suffered loss, finding a quiet kind of understanding in each other's presence. One evening, as we sat on my porch sipping tea, I realized that I hadn't felt this at ease in years. I wasn't sure if it was the company or the simple beauty of the moment, but I could feel the weight of the past slowly lifting. Grace didn't ask about my life in the city or the details of what had happened with Megan. She didn't need to. It was like she understood that some things couldn't be fixed, and sometimes, the best thing to do was just to sit together in silence and let time do its work. As weeks turned into months, I found myself growing stronger. The farm was thriving. I had built a small greenhouse, planted an orchard, and even started selling some of the produce to the local market. I found pride in the work I was doing. I was no longer defined by the man I had been, the man who had been hurt. I was becoming something new, someone different. And in many ways I felt like I was finally starting to heal. But healing didn't mean forgetting. Every now and then I would think about Megan, the life we had shared, the years that now seemed like they belonged to someone else. I remembered the early days of our marriage, the laughter, the promises, the dreams. And then I remembered the video, the betrayal. It still hurt. It always would. But it no longer defined me. One day as I was tending to the garden, I received a letter. It was from Megan. I hesitated before opening it, unsure of what I would find inside. When I finally read the letter, I found that it was a simple apology. There were no excuses, no explanations, just a heartfelt expression of regret for what she had done. She acknowledged the pain she had caused not just to me but to herself. It was a far cry from the pleading phone calls and the desperate apologies she had offered before. I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't sure I was ready to forgive her either. But the letter gave me something I hadn't expected: closure. It was as if, in those words, I could finally let go of the last piece of the past that had been holding me back. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer of my desk. It wasn't something I needed to dwell on. It was just one more thing that I had to put behind me as I moved forward. And with that, I realized something important. Grace had brought a quiet kind of peace into my life, but it was up to me to continue the healing. I couldn't hold on to the past forever. I had a new life now. A life that was simple, peaceful, and full of potential. I had found my footing again, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The days passed slowly on the farm, each one blending into the next, but there was a peace in that rhythm that I had come to cherish. I had settled into a routine that felt comfortable, almost like I had found my place in the world again. My mornings were spent in the garden, planting vegetables and herbs, while the afternoons were dedicated to tending to the orchard I had started. The work was grueling at times, but it was honest and straightforward. It gave me something to focus on, a purpose beyond the pain I had left behind in the city. Grace and I continued to see each other, though it was never rushed. We spent time together in the evenings, sitting on my porch or taking quiet walks around the property. Her company had become a comfort, a kind of balm for the raw wounds I had carried for so long. But there was still something unspoken between us, a barrier I hadn't yet crossed. Grace had suffered her own loss, the death of her husband, David, and though she had learned to live with it, I could tell there were parts of her that still hadn't fully healed. I understood that. I understood her need for space just as I had needed mine. One afternoon as I worked in the garden, I noticed her standing at the edge of the field, watching me with a thoughtful expression. I paused, wiping the sweat from my forehead, and walked over to her. "What's on your mind?" I asked, knowing something was weighing on her. She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "I've been thinking a lot about the past," she said quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. "I never really let go of David. Not completely. And I'm not sure if I ever will." I nodded, understanding more than I cared to admit. Loss was something that didn't have a clear timeline. It didn't follow any rules. You didn't just wake up one day and decide you were healed. Healing took time, sometimes more than you were ready to give it. And even then, the scars would always be there, hidden beneath the surface. "I know what you mean," I said softly, looking down at the ground for a moment before meeting her eyes. "I think I've been running from my own past, trying to outrun the hurt, the betrayal. But no matter how far I go, it follows me. And I think I've been lying to myself, pretending that I could just forget about it." Grace's eyes softened as she reached out, gently touching my arm. "I don't think forgetting is the answer, John. I think it's about learning to live with it. Accepting that it's a part of you, but it doesn't have to control you. It's about finding peace with it." Her words hit me hard, more than I expected. I had spent so much time trying to bury my pain, trying to push it down and pretend like it didn't matter. But Grace was right. I couldn't outrun it. I had to face it. I had to make peace with the things I couldn't change. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the breeze rustling the leaves of the trees around us. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was beginning to understand something important, something that had eluded me for months. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the land, I realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I could finally let go of the anger, the resentment, and the pain. I didn't have to forget what had happened, but I could choose to move forward. I could choose to heal. The next few weeks passed in a blur of quiet contemplation and hard work. I threw myself into the farm with renewed purpose, pouring my energy into building something real, something I could be proud of. The land was beginning to show signs of life, and so was I. I even started to open up more to Grace. We spent hours talking, sharing stories of our pasts and the lessons we had learned along the way. There was no rush between us. There were no expectations, just two people finding solace in each other's company. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky, Grace turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about Megan?" she asked gently. The question caught me off guard. I had been avoiding thoughts of her, trying to push her out of my mind as much as possible. But Grace was right. I couldn't just ignore it forever. "I do," I said quietly. "I think about what we had, what we lost. But it's not as painful as it once was. I've accepted that things ended the way they did, and I've come to terms with it. I can't change it. All I can do is move forward." Grace nodded, her gaze distant. "It's not easy, is it? Moving forward. But it's the only choice we have." I nodded in agreement. It wasn't easy. But it was the only way. The past would always be a part of me, but I didn't have to let it define me anymore. I had a new life now, one that was full of possibility and hope. I had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about acceptance. It was about choosing to live despite the pain, despite the mistakes. And as the days passed, I began to see the world in a new light. The land, the work, and the quiet moments with grace. They all helped to remind me that life could still be beautiful, even after everything had fallen apart. Life on the farm had settled into a rhythm, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was beginning to understand what peace really meant. Every morning I woke up to the same sounds, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, and the faint hum of the land as it slowly came to life. The weight of my past still lingered in the background, but it was becoming easier to live with, to accept. I had learned that healing wasn't a linear path. Some days it felt like I was moving forward, and others it felt like I was taking 2 steps back. But each day I grew stronger. It was on one of these days that the unexpected happened. I had just finished tending to the garden and was preparing to start on the orchard when I saw a familiar face approaching the farm from a distance. My heart sank before I even recognized who it was. Megan. I hadn't seen her since the day I moved out of the house. After that moment, she had left me alone, giving me space to heal. She had respected my decision to walk away, and in a way, I had respected hers. I knew she was struggling with her own guilt, her own grief. But seeing her again here, standing on the land I had come to claim as my own, threw me off balance. She was standing at the edge of the field, her posture hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she should come any closer. I hadn't prepared myself for this. I wasn't ready to face her again, not yet. I walked toward her slowly, the weight of the past pressing down on me with every step. As I got closer, she took a deep breath and stepped forward, her face a mix of regret and something else I couldn't quite place. John ***, she said softly, her voice shaky as though speaking my name hurt. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't know how to respond. Seeing her, hearing her voice brought everything rushing back. The good memories, the painful ones, the trust that had been shattered. She had been the center of my life for so long, and now she felt like a ghost. What are you doing here? I asked, the words coming out more coldly than I intended. I tried to keep my emotions in check, but seeing her again stirred up old feelings I wasn't prepared to confront. She paused, swallowing hard. I just wanted to see you. To apologize, again. I know I hurt you, John. I've spent so much time thinking about everything I've done, and I know words can't fix it, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I stood there in silence, watching her. She had always been so composed, so strong. But now, standing before me, she looked vulnerable, a shadow of the woman I had known. It was hard to reconcile the person she was now with the person she had been when we built our life together. Megan ***, I said after a long pause, my voice quieter, almost too soft. You can't undo what happened. I don't know why you're here, but I can't go back. I've tried to move on. I've tried to rebuild my life, and this just feels like another wound being reopened. Her eyes welled with tears, and I could see the pain in her expression. She had never looked so broken. I know, and I understand. But I can't live with the guilt anymore. I don't want to be the person I was when I hurt you. I just needed to say it, to let you know that I'm truly sorry for everything. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I didn't want to be angry. I didn't want to be bitter. But seeing her there, knowing what had happened, made it difficult to feel anything but resentment. Megan ***, I said, my voice steady now. I've learned something over the past few months. I've learned that holding on to anger, to resentment, it's not going to heal me. But that doesn't mean I can forget. What you did, it changed everything. It changed me. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. But I'm not the same person I was when I first left. I'm learning to accept it, to move on, because holding on to the past is just keeping me stuck. There was a long silence between us. The world around us seemed to pause, like time had stopped just for this moment. Megan didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, her shoulders slumped as if the weight of her actions had finally crushed her. I understand, she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. I don't expect forgiveness, John. I just wanted you to know that I've learned. I've changed. And I'll always regret what I did to you. I will carry that for the rest of my life. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of closure. It wasn't the reunion I had imagined, but in a way it was more than I had expected. She wasn't asking for anything from me. She wasn't begging for another chance. She was simply acknowledging the hurt she had caused and taking responsibility for it. That was something I hadn't expected. I'm sorry, she repeated, her voice breaking. "I know," I said quietly, feeling a weight lift off my chest. "I know." We stood there for a long while, neither of us saying anything. The air was heavy, the tension thick. But something shifted in that silence. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close to it. I didn't need to hold on to the pain anymore. And maybe, just maybe, Megan didn't need to carry the guilt anymore. Finally, I turned and walked back toward the farmhouse, knowing that our encounter had come to an end. Megan didn't follow. She stood there for a moment, and then, without a word, she turned and walked back down the path, disappearing into the distance. As I stood there watching her leave, I realized something important. The past didn't have to define me anymore. It had been part of my story, but it wasn't my whole story. There was more ahead. There was more to discover, more to rebuild. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready for it. The days after Megan left the farm were quiet, but in a way that silence was welcome. The air felt lighter, the burden of unresolved emotions beginning to lift. I spent my time focusing on the farm, on the work that had always given me purpose. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to realize something important. The peace I had been searching for wasn't just about being away from Megan or the life I had left behind. It was about accepting the person I had become, despite everything. I had no illusions that life was perfect. The road to healing was still long, but with each passing day, I felt more grounded. There were still moments when the memory of Megan and the betrayal she caused would creep into my mind, but they no longer had the power to control me. Instead of anger, I felt a strange sense of understanding. The past was a part of me, yes, but it didn't have to define who I was becoming. That's when I started to see things differently, both the farm and my future. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of hope for what lay ahead. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, Grace came to join me, her familiar smile softening the weight of the day. She had become a steady presence in my life, someone I could rely on without the pressure of expectations. "I've been thinking," Grace said as she sat down beside me, her voice filled with contemplation. "You've put so much work into this place. It's more than just a farm now, John. It's a reflection of you, of your strength and resilience." I glanced at her, unsure of how to respond. "I guess I never thought about it that way. I've just been trying to get through each day." "You're not just getting through," she said gently. "You're building something that's your own. You've created a life that's real, that matters. And you've done it without needing to run from your past." Her words struck me in a way I wasn't expecting. She was right. I had been running for so long, but now I was finally facing the life I had built for myself, and I was proud of it. "I don't know what's next," I said, my voice filled with uncertainty. "But I feel like I'm starting to understand that I don't need to have all the answers right now." Grace nodded, her expression kind. "You don't have to have everything figured out. You're where you need to be." We sat there for a while, both watching the sky turn dark as the stars began to appear. There was a calmness in that moment, a quiet certainty that everything I had been through had led me to this point. A few weeks later, I decided to take a leap of faith. I wasn't sure where it would take me, but I knew I needed to move forward, not just for myself, but for the future I was creating. I applied to a local agricultural initiative that helped small farmers like myself expand their businesses. It felt like a risk, my first real step back into the world outside my quiet farm. But something about it felt right. For the first time in years, I was thinking about the future, about what I could build next, rather than clinging to the past. One morning I got the call. The initiative had accepted my application, and they wanted to partner with me on a project to expand my farm's produce and develop a sustainable market. It was a small opportunity, but it was a start, a way to move forward, to take what I had built and grow it. As I walked back to the farmhouse, holding the letter in my hands, I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't the life I had expected, but it was my life. One that I had chosen, one that I had worked for. I wasn't living in the shadow of the past anymore. I had moved beyond the betrayal, beyond the heartache. And in doing so, I had found a new sense of purpose. That evening, Grace and I celebrated over dinner, toasting to the future. She had been there, silently supporting me through every step, and now it felt like we were both ready to see where this new chapter would take us. We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other, and that was enough. As the days turned into months, I found myself thriving in ways I hadn't thought possible. The farm flourished, and with Grace by my side, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The healing wasn't complete, but it was real. And it was enough. In the end, I learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past or forgetting the mistakes that had been made. It was about learning from them, growing from them, and finding the strength to move forward. Life would never be the same as it once was, but in many ways that was a blessing. The man I was becoming was stronger, wiser, and more at peace with himself than the man I had been before. And for the first time in a long time, I believed in the future again.